Hello, and thank you for joining our weekly webinar session. Today we are talking about boosting your installation and troubleshooting knowledge. The presenter today is going to be Jeremy Hansen, and my name is David Demkowski. I will be on this call as well. Go to the next slide, please. The basic format that we're going to use for the seminar is basically we want to build your up and ready IQ. There's a presenter, Jeremy, and myself as a moderator. And there's going to be a 30-minute presentation. Jeremy's going to discuss the presentation he's put together for you, and then we're going to have 30 minutes of question and answer. You can also, please feel free to ask any questions. If you notice on the right of your screen, there should be a questions window. You can just enter in the questions as we go. We'll try to answer them as the presentation is going, and we'll also wrap back at the end and we'll discuss them as well. Next slide, please. Okay, coming up, our next event, if you're interested, is to boost your knowledge of installation prerequisites. This is going to help discuss a little bit of hardware requirements and possibly some software requirements as well. Something like this is useful for people that are looking at buying new systems potentially, or to make sure that their current systems are up to speed. So what I'm going to do is hand the presentation over to Jeremy, and he's going to start us off.
All right, welcome everyone. Glad you could join us. First off, I just want to highlight some of the previous webinars we've done in this series. Started off with network licensing, just how to set up your network license. You have the network license manager. Next was network license files, so kind of just how to read the license file. After that, we had just basic installation process, some tips on how to install successfully, and then deploying the software over the network, creating network deployments after that. And then a couple weeks ago we had one called the Autodesk installation log IQ. So today's webinar kind of builds on the knowledge from that one. So hopefully at least some of you got to either attend or watch the recording of that one. I'm going to refer to it a couple of times here throughout the webinar today also. And then finally last week we had errors with network licensing, which brings us to today. Today we are covering installation errors. And the fun thing about installation errors is that there's a whole lot of different things that can cause them. It can happen because the prerequisites, due to permissions, whether it be file permissions, folder permissions, registry permissions, what have you. The installation files can get corrupted and cause the install to fail. If you're doing like an install now or a download now, you can have download errors or failures that prevent the install from completing successfully. If you're trying to do like an uninstall and a reinstall of the software, sometimes the remnants remain from the previous install, which can prevent the new one from installing. And sometimes you'll have old video drivers on there, and sometimes that can cause the installer just to crash even really before you get into the install process. And there's many other reasons in addition to these. This is just a few of them. So what I don't want to do is just kind of take a random sample of various install errors and just kind of run through all those, because that doesn't really give you any tools that you can use in the future. So the nice thing is that most, certainly not all, but most install errors can be prevented with a few best practices. What I'm going to do throughout the webinar today here is we're going to build a series of best practices as we go through this. So we're going to look at a variety of install errors. Some of them will give us a best practice that we can use that will prevent that install error from happening in the future and can prevent various install errors. I'm going to also do some of the more common install errors in addition to ones that can be prevented by best practices. So I'll kind of intersperse ones that will give you a best practice and ones where it's kind of a one-off, but we see it quite a bit. But even if you did follow the best practices, you would still probably get the install error. So let's move on to our first installation error. So sometimes you'll be trying to install a piece of software and you think you got the right Windows version, and yet it comes up with operating system unsupported. In this case, this person has Windows 7 Home Premium. They're trying to install Revit 2015, yet it tells them operating system unsupported. Well, how would they have known why that is telling you it's unsupported? In this case, the cause happens to be that Revit 2015 requires Service Pack 1. In order to know that, you would have to check the Revit 2015 system requirements. So if we come here into the Revit system requirements, we can see right here, minimum entry-level configuration operating system for Windows 7, it's 7SP1. So if we go back to the original screenshot here, we can see it's Windows 7 Home Premium, but down here, normally if they're on Service Pack 1, it would say Service Pack 1 right here. Instead, it says get more features with a new edition of Windows 7, which means, hey, there's a newer version of Windows 7 available, which in this case is talking about Service Pack 1. So the solution in this case, run Windows Update and install Service Pack 1 for Windows 7. At that point, Revit 2015 will install, or at least it will get past that operating system unsupported error. So this leads us to our first best practice, which is always make sure you check the system requirements first. There can be little things like this, like the Service Pack 1 for Windows 7 is required. If you're installing a suite, depending on what version of Windows you have, it's possible that some products in the suite will install successfully, but other products in the suite are not supported by the version of Windows that you're using. So very important, before you even decide to purchase the software, make sure you check the system requirements to make sure that your system that you're going to be installing it on is going to meet those. All right, let's move on to another error. This one will not lead us to a best practice, but I wanted to cover this one because for those of you who happen to attend the earlier one, you may recognize this particular error here. So I wanted to give you a solution for this one. Plus, we've seen this a fair amount lately, so it's one of the more common errors that we've been seeing. So we particularly see this with suites. So during the installation process, everything looks like it's going fine, but then all of a sudden this message pops up. A newer version of the software is already installed, and it doesn't tell you what software it is. All it gives you is the name of the suite up there. And then at the end of it, it'll just give you the list of products that failed to install, which would be all of them. This is just a snippet of the screen there that would show you all the things that failed to install. But it'll really just say installation complete, some products failed to install. It'll list every single product that it was trying to install with a red X next to it and failed. So you don't really know which one failed. And it happens to be, in this case, that it's because there's already a version of the Autodesk BIM 360 add-in for Revit. And don't get hung up on the Revit part because there's multiple BIM 360 add-ins that get installed, so it could potentially be any of those BIM 360 add-ins. In this particular case, it just happens to be the Revit one. And how do we know that? Again, this will be familiar for those of you that attended the webinar a couple of weeks ago about the setup and install logs. But for those of you who didn't, we're going to just do a quick overview of it here. So if you click on, let me actually go back to the original screenshot here. If you click on this link down here, installation log file, any of these, they'll all take you to the same place. You'll have the installation log file link multiple times on that list of products that failed to install. So click on any of them. All of them will launch the setup log for that install. So the setup log just kind of provides an overview of all the products that are getting installed and whether they installed successfully or not. And so the easy way to spot the error in here is if you do a find search for fail. Should be the first failure in here. And there we see it. We see that if it failed on the BIM 360 add-in for Revit. But this doesn't tell you that it failed because it was a newer version. All this does is give you a result 1603. Now, in order to get more detail about why exactly it failed on the BIM 360 add-in for Revit and to make sure that this really is what that error message was talking about where it said newer versions are installed, we have to look in the install log for the BIM 360 add-in for Revit. So the setup log and the install log will both be created in the Windows temp folder. So if you go to start, run, type in %temp%, that will take you to your temp folder. So in there you'll see the setup log, which you just had open, and also the install log for BIM 360. This will contain much more specific information about all the various install steps for each product that's getting installed, not just an overview of the entire suite that you're installing, or product, point product if you're doing a point product like AutoCAD or Revit or any of those. So in here, there's a couple of ways to find the error message in here. Again, this will be familiar to those of you that watched the earlier one. To those of you that didn't, I actually suggest that you go back and watch that recording. The slide deck will be made available after the webinar is complete, and it contains links to all the YouTube recordings of the earlier webinars. So strongly suggest that you go back through and watch at least the ones that may look interesting to you, and especially the one covering the installation logs. So to find the error in here, there's a couple of things you can search for. Usually I'll start off searching for disable rollback, if I can spell right. In this case, I know that this isn't going to take me to the right spot exactly in this one. With the BIM 360 add-in, it doesn't do its search for disable rollback right after the error happens. It's pretty close here, but you can kind of cheat and look up here and see it, but it's not really as close as would like it to be. So another thing that you can search for is return value 3. Return value 3 means that whatever the installer was trying to do did not succeed, or it didn't meet its conditions, for whatever reason. Something failed to install there. So now we can see right above there, Autodesk BIM 360 Revit add-in failed to install. A newer version of the software is already installed. So now we know why it failed, but now how do we resolve it? Well, pretty simple. All you have to do is go into Control Panel, look for anything that starts with Autodesk BIM 360. Again, usually with suites, you're installing multiple products that will come with a BIM 360 add-in. In this case, they happen to fail on the Revit one, but you might go in and uninstall just the BIM 360 add-in for Revit, and then it'll fail on another BIM 360 add-in for AutoCAD or one of the other products in the suite. So it's really easy. It's just to go in and uninstall all of the BIM 360 add-ins that are currently installed, and then go ahead and install the suite or point product. Usually, like I said, we'll see this with the suite, and it should install successfully at that point. And once it is installed, then likely you'll get prompted for updates for the BIM 360 to update it back up to the version that it was before. But to actually get it installed, you just want to wipe out the ones that are installed there. You can go in and do a customize your install and uncheck the BIM 360 add-ins from installing. You'd have to go into Revit and AutoCAD. All of them that have a BIM 360. It's kind of a pain because it's hard to tell right off the bat which ones are going to have that BIM 360 add-in. So it's much easier just go and uninstall the BIM 360 add-ins, and then you get past the error and can install it successfully. All right, so another error we'll sometimes see is with prerequisites. And the fun thing about that is you don't get any error message that's useful during the install process. It'll go along, chugging along, and it will just show you this. Installation complete, some products failed to install. Nothing popped up saying, hey, failed on C++ or Microsoft.NET, nothing like that. So these are fun to try to figure out what exactly went on to cause the install to fail. Again, the setup log is really where you're going to want to look to figure out what failed. So you'd click on that installation log file link right there, and it will take you into the setup log. We'll do our search for fail, and we can see right here, install Microsoft Visual C++ 2008 KB yada 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 yada, failed, installation aborted, result equals 1603. And again, this part will be familiar to those that attended the earlier webinar about the log files, but ignore any errors in this rollback section. You can see rollback in all of these lines. So what happens is when the install fails, it tries to roll back everything that it just installed. And you'll almost always see a rollback error on Visual C++. But the install has already failed at this point, so these are irrelevant to what actually caused the install to fail. You want the error just above the rollback section, which in this case is Visual C++ 2008 KB 958314. And so there's a couple of potential ways to resolve that error. You can go into Control Panel and uninstall the Microsoft Visual C++ items there, in particular the year that the setup log points to. So in this case, you would uninstall the 2008 Visual C++, especially the x86 ones. The x64 may not matter so much in this case. But you can try doing that and then do the reinstall. Usually that'll get it working. But sometimes that won't get it done. Like you'll already have the Visual C++ installed. You can see it's installed. It's fine, and yet the install will still fail. Well, at that point, what you can do is edit the setup ini file. This file is in the same folder as like the setup exe that you launched to run the software. You can't do this with an install now because the install now installs as it's downloading, so there's no setup ini for you to edit to get rid of the Visual C++ references. You also can't do it if your install files are on install media. So if you have like a USB drive, those are read-only. So at that point, you would need to copy the files from the USB drive onto your hard drive, and you will then at that point be able to set up or edit the setup ini. If you're doing install now, instead do either a download now or a browser download. That will download the install files to your computer before the install process starts, and that way you can edit the setup ini. So let's take a look at how we can edit the setup ini to exclude the item that's failing to install. So you see there's all kinds of stuff in this setup ini. The sections we're really concerned about are in the install and execute, especially the prerequisite section for a lot of these things. But if you don't know specifically what you're searching for, you can see there's lots of stuff in here. So how do we determine what it is that we need to come in here and get rid of so we can get past this point where it's failing? Well, let's go back to the setup log, and what you can do is look at the specific name of this item that's failing to install. So here's the line talking about it failing to install again, and everything between the word install and failed is the name of the product that's failing to install. So if you grab that, we'll copy the text out of there. So this whole Microsoft Visual C++ 2008, everything through x86. Let's go back to the setup ini and do a search. All right, so now we can see this takes us to the section that's referring to the update or the product that failed to install. Anything that's in brackets like this is a definition of what gets installed when this particular command is called in the setup log. So we know that this is the name of the command here in the setup ini. Sorry, I said setup log earlier. It's setup ini. And so what we want to do is do a search for that. So I'm going to do a copy on there, go back up to the top, and do a find. Now this will be listed most likely multiple times throughout this setup ini file. So you're going to want to remove it for every instance that you find it. It doesn't really matter if you remove it from the section that's in brackets, because that section, like I said, it only defines what happens if that command is called out earlier in the setup ini, so in a section where it actually runs that. So if it's not called out anywhere else, it's not actually going to run that section. So you don't need to remove that section if you remove it from everywhere else. Honestly, it's probably easier just take it out anywhere you find it. That way you don't have to worry about it. So what you do is you come in there, you delete the reference to it, make sure you don't have any extra semicolons in there, and then do a find next. Just keep doing this all the way through until you get every single one of these removed. And once you do that, save your setup ini. Definitely strongly suggest that you make a backup of it before you do any of these editings. But say you've gone through it, you've removed all the references to that command, you want to do a save, and then you can go ahead and run your install again, and it will completely skip over trying to install that Visual C++ that failed to install, and should install successfully at that point. Now you're not, this leads to our next best practice here. Install all important updates from Windows Update. It's almost a two-edged sword doing this, because especially if you're installing an older version of software, like a 2012 version, you actually need an older version of like the Microsoft.NET or the Visual C++ installed. But if you have all of the important updates from Windows Update installed, you'll get rid of a whole lot more install errors than you're going to have to worry about than it would cause. So very important, make sure you have all the updates from Windows Update installed, all the important updates. The optional ones, aren't really that important, but any important ones, those are going to cover the prerequisites, the Microsoft.NET, the Visual C++, things like that. All right, let's move on to another error that we see quite a bit. If you're doing an uninstall and a reinstall of the software, or you had the software installed a while back and now you're wanting to install it again, sometimes the installer will detect that that is still installed. So in this case, it's showing AutoCAD Architecture 2015 and AutoCAD MEP 2015 are already installed, but they aren't actually. You can go down to the Start button, All Programs, Autodesk. It doesn't show AutoCAD Architecture 2015 or AutoCAD MEP 2015 there. Still has remnants somewhere from the previous install that's making the installer think it's already installed. Well, so how do you fix that? You could go through and try to manually delete any files you find in your hard drive referencing those products. Scan through the registry and try to delete the items there. It's asking for trouble at that point. I mean, it's a pain to try to find every single nook and cranny where the remnants from that previous install are hiding. So the easiest and safest way is to use Microsoft's Fix-It tool. They have a Fix-It tool they've made for just such a situation where you're having trouble uninstalling or installing software, in this case, uninstalling. So if you come to this Fix-It page, it's got all kinds of different Fix-It tools on it, but there's only one particular one we're interested in at this point. So ignore Section 1. In Section 2, we want install or upgrade software or hardware, since we're trying to install software here. So give you a list of a bunch of different Fix-It tools down here at the bottom. The one we're looking for will usually be the second one from the bottom until they change the layout of the page, but it's been this way for quite a while, which is fix problems that programs cannot be installed or uninstalled. Not great English, but great tool. So let's try running this. We'll download, you have to hit run, and then they make you accept their licensing agreement. And at this point, usually we'll recommend detect problems and let me select the fixes to apply. That way you can, present you with a list of options for what you want, what action you want it to take, and you can tell it which one you want it to do. So in this case, we want to do uninstalling. We're actually trying to install software, but what we want to do is fully uninstall the previous installation of it. So it's a little counterintuitive here in that we are trying to install the software, but what we're really trying to do first is uninstall the old one. So we want uninstalling. And this will look through and detect all of the software that's installed on the system. So this takes a few seconds to populate the list of installed programs. So we'll sit here and wait for it to do its thing. Shouldn't take too much longer. There we go. All right. So if you're trying to install, say, like AutoCAD 2012, you come in here, you select AutoCAD 2012 from the list. In this case, it's also got a language pack. You can only uninstall one item at a time with this tool. So if there were multiple parts to the software, like this AutoCAD 2012, you'd run it once for one of these parts. So I'd do the full program first, and then run it again and uninstall the other part of the software. It won't let you do them both at the same time. So you'd select that, hit next, and usually just say yes, try uninstall, and then it'll go through and try to uninstall the software. I'm not going to do that now because I want to keep AutoCAD on the system, but that's how that tool works, and that will almost always clear out the issue where if you got remnants from a previous install, it'll clear those out, and you can then go ahead and install the new piece of software. And that doesn't really lead us to a best practice exactly. This is, you don't really want to run the fix-it tool every single time that you're going to install software just to make sure that you don't have a remnant from an earlier one installed. That'd be kind of a pain. So this is kind of, if you have this problem, here's how you fix it, but it doesn't lead us to a best practice that we can make sure we do every time we're doing an install that would prevent this problem from happening in the first place. So let's move on to one that will give us a best practice we can add to our list of things to do. In this case, you get an error about insufficient permissions or sufficient privileges, anything along those lines. In this case, it's an error 1920. It's trying to start a job manager service, but it failed to start because the person who's trying to install the software, whichever user account is logged into Windows, does not have sufficient privileges to start system services. So not just this service that is trying to start, but system services, period, in general. And when we see that, it's almost always because the person who's trying to install the software does not have administrative permissions on the computer. If they have like power user or something like that, they may not have all the permissions necessary to allow that software to install successfully. So how to resolve that? Log into Windows with an account that has administrative privileges. You can temporarily grant that user administrative permissions or privileges on the computer if like it's an IT environment and normal users don't have administrative permissions on their system. Temporarily give it to them. Have one of the IT people log in with their super admin account on the computer, install the software for the user, anything like that. But just make sure that the account that you're using to install the software does have administrative permissions on that computer. So that leads us to the best practice. Get administrative permissions. Again, this will prevent all kinds of potential permissions issues if you just use an account that has administrative permissions. It doesn't mean use the administrator account on the computer. It just means that whatever account is in the administrators group. So not the administrator account necessarily. I mean, that would work too, but normally by default that's disabled, and so it'd be a pain to have to enable that and log in with it. But just any account that has administrative permissions on the computer. All right, so let's move on to another error that we see quite a bit here. This usually, this error can present itself in a couple of different ways. You can see an error 1402, which means it couldn't open a particular key in the registry. You can see an error 1406, couldn't write to a particular key in the registry. They're basically related. It just has to do with permissions in the Windows registry. Something is not right in those permissions, and so the install is failing because it can't read or write what it needs to in those registry keys. So how do you fix that? Let's actually take a look at what those 1402 and 1406 error messages mean first. This page, a very useful page, it has a listing of various Windows installer error messages. So if you see a 1402, you don't know what that means, well, this will at least kind of tell you what it means. I mean, it'll still not always complete plain English, but it's at least better than just having an error number. So we can see right here, 1402, could not open key, and then it'll give you the name of the key, system error, and it'll give you a system error number at that point. So you see these are pretty closely related. 1402 could not open key, 1406 could not write value to key. So if you get a 1402, you didn't have permission to even open that key to look at it. If you get a 1406, you may have had permission to open the key, but you couldn't write a value to that key. So they're pretty much related. Anytime you see either one of those, it's going to be the same issue. And the fun way to fix that is you have to go into the registry and fix the permissions. If you'll notice, let's actually go back to that error message really quick here. It doesn't always give you a great path to which registry key it's talking about. It'll have like unknown /components or /software /classes. So it doesn't give you the full path to the registry key that you're looking for. Well, it'll be here. You know, it'll be under H key, local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows current version, installer, user data, all that stuff. So that you can find in our knowledge article here about how to resolve this error. So error 1402 during installation could not open key. Again, 1406 is going to be the same solution on it here. And with this particular error, it usually comes in groups. So it'll be /components /some hex code /another hex code. Well, if you only go to that one specific key that it's referring to and fix the permissions on that one, chances are next time you try to install it, you'll get almost the exact same error message, except this last hex code is going to be slightly different. There's, you know, dozens potentially of these keys underneath this, you know, root path, all of which it has to write to or read, and all of which are going to have the same error, same permissions issue. So the easiest way to fix it, all in one step, is do this from the components section in the registry. Don't drill down all the way to the specific key it's talking about. Do the permissions fix up here in the components, and that'll take care of everything below components that has any permissions issues. You go into the registry editor. If you don't know how to get in there, just start and reged it. Here is the registry editor. So you drill down to this path right here, and right-click on components. It's like permissions. It just kind of runs through how to reset the permissions on it. You have to take ownership of it first and replace. Here's the really important part: replace owner on subcontainers and objects. If you don't do it on the components, subcontainers, and objects, it'll just do it on the components key, and it won't apply that to anything below that. And so you want to absolutely make sure that that box is checked when you do this. Once you take ownership of it, you can then go to the permissions tab and have it replace all the permissions underneath components with the new permissions, and that will take care of that issue. That way you have sufficient permissions at that point to open or modify the registry key that it was pointing to. Again, doesn't really lead us to a best practice. This is kind of, if the permissions happen to get corrupted, then here's how you fix it. But you don't want to go in there and preemptively start messing with permissions in the registry, because that by itself can cause issues with, all kinds of things, not just installing Autodesk software at that point. So again, no real best practice in this case, but this is an issue that we see quite a bit. So wanted to cover that and show you how you can get that fixed. Here's one that's actually going to lead us to two best practices. We get to kill two birds with one stone in this case. We see this error way too often. In this case, it's the system cannot open the device or file specified, and then it points to some file. Usually, a lot of times we'll see it with the Design Review 2013, but it can be like a setup exe, or just about any of the install files can show up here. And there's a couple of things that can cause that particular message. Usually it's due to antivirus software blocking the installation from doing what it needs to do. That's kind of what antivirus software is designed to do. It's supposed to prevent suspicious activities on the computer, and the installer is making all these changes, and sometimes that'll make the antivirus software freak out, and it'll block whatever the installer is trying to do. And the other issue can sometimes be that there's a problem with the Windows temp folder. During the install process, maybe it can't extract the temp files to the temp folder successfully due to some permissions issue or an issue with the files that are already in the temp folder. So there's a couple of different things that you can do to get around that. First, absolutely, always disable your antivirus software when you're going to install any Autodesk software. Now, I know in some IT environments it can be a challenge to do that. End users may not have permissions to disable it, so at that point IT needs to get involved to disable the antivirus software. We've seen it a lot with like Trend Micro in particular. That one's kind of notorious for having issues with Autodesk software. I guess it's a little more aggressive than some of the other antivirus software. But yeah, absolutely disable your antivirus software when you're going to be installing an Autodesk product. Another thing to do is empty your Windows temp folder before you try to install Autodesk software, because like I said, if there's any, like if you've tried to install a software already and it's partially extracted some of the temp files, that can play havoc with trying to install it again, or just plain old corruption of any sort in the temp folder. Occasionally you have to actually move the temp folder to a new location temporarily. There's some issue with the Windows temp folder that's preventing it from extracting the temp file successfully. So there's a way to move the temp folder temporarily, and this knowledge article here covers how to do that. It's a little bit involved, so I'm not going to go into it a whole lot here. But you basically, it involves changing the settings in an environment variable in Windows. So you'd change the temp and TMP values to point to a new folder. You create a new folder and then point Windows to it as the temp folder, and then do the install. And that will either disable the antivirus or clearing out the temp folder or moving the temp folder will get around that particular error message. So again, that leads us to 2 best practices. So best practice number 4, disable your antivirus software. Cannot stress that enough. Absolutely, disable your antivirus software before you try installing the Autodesk software. And best practice number 5, empty the Windows temp folder. Not always necessary, certainly, but it can prevent a lot of install issues if you do go in and empty the Windows temp folder. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to delete the files in there. You could temporarily move them out to another folder if you have other temp files you want to keep in there. Like if you have earlier Autodesk installs, you want to keep the temp files in there for whatever reason, you can just move them to another folder, but just clear them out of the Windows temp folder and then install the Autodesk software. That can also be kind of helpful in that you don't have all these other temp files in there cluttering things up. If you do run into an install issue, it makes it a little easier to find your setup and install logs in there if you need to do that. All right, let's move on to another common error that we see. Communication failure. This can happen when you're using either the install now or download now methods. Those both use a download manager to download the install files. With install now, it actually installs while it's downloading. With download now, it downloads all of the install files and then starts the install once they're all downloaded. But they both use the download manager. There's some advantages to using the download manager in that it will resume a download if it gets cut off for whatever reason. It'll resume it from the place it left off instead of having to start over from the beginning. But it can cause communication failures. And so it's not always an issue with the actual download process itself necessarily. If you do use an install now to try to install software and then for whatever reason you don't complete the installation, maybe you had an error during the install, or you just didn't have time to complete the install and you cancel out of it. If you then go back and try to browse to where the install now downloaded the install files, usually C Autodesk / whatever the name of the product is you're installing. If you try to run the setup exe from there, it'll give you a communication failure. So install now is designed, the name of it really says what it's designed for. It's designed for installing now, not download now and install later. Now sometimes it'll create a shortcut on your desktop to continue the install later. So if you use that shortcut on a desktop, a lot of times that'll work, but not if you browse straight to the downloaded install files and try to run those. The other issue that can cause that error again is connectivity issues during the download. For some reason, that it gets cut off during the download and it just gives that communication failure. There's a couple ways around it when you get that error message. You can download it through either the browser download method. So when you're downloading through either Subscription Center or your Autodesk account, there will be a button there that says Install Now. Usually that button will have a down arrow on the right end of it, which will pop up a list of other optional download methods, one of which will be browser download. When you do a browser download, that will, it's just like downloading a regular file through your web browser. You know, it shows up down at the bottom. There's with the progress and all that. And so it downloads it, and then you start the install process after it's downloaded. Another way to get the downloaded files that way without doing the browser download is through our virtual agent. Let's go and take a quick look at the virtual agent here. You can get there. I usually send people to our Up and Ready site, which hopefully it will actually load here. And this has a link to the virtual agent, makes it easy to get to. If the page loads, come on. We'll see if it wants to load. If it doesn't, we'll just skip at it. There we go. All right. So this handy Ask button here on the top right pops up our virtual agent. And if you go to Download Links, say you want to download, I don't know, Billing Design Suite again. You go to this Autodesk Suite section, Autodesk Billing Design Suite. Let's say we're getting Ultimate. We spent a bunch of money, got this excellent Ultimate version, and we want to get Billing Design Suite 2015, so Ultimate 2015. You'll notice here it has multiple parts, 4 parts. You know, each part can't be over a certain size, so it has to divide it up into multiple parts because it's a pretty big piece of software. So what you need to do is download all of these parts. So download all 4 parts, wait for them all to complete downloading, and then you can run any one of those 4 parts, and it will launch. It will start extracting the files and launch the install process once they're done extracting. But this will get you around any communication failure messages because again you're downloading all of the install files before the installer actually happens, and it doesn't use any sort of download manager. It just downloads straight through your browser. One thing to be aware of is that if you're downloading a suite using the browser download method, you need to make sure you have your pop-up blocker disabled. It will, if you have your pop-up blocker enabled and it blocks that page where you're trying to download it, it'll only download the first part. It won't download parts 2, 3, and potentially 4, however many parts there are in the suite. So make sure you have your browser pop-up blocker disabled if you're going to use that browser download method. Again, doesn't really lead us to a best practice. Normally it's fine doing an install now or a download now. It's just sometimes, for whatever reason, you do get that communication failure, so this is a way to work around it. Just download it through the browser download or the virtual agent, either one, and that'll get around that communication failure issue. All right, so this is an interesting one in that you'll usually get 2 error messages, one right after the other during the install process. The first error message will be error 1303. Installer has insufficient privileges to access this directory, and then it'll give you a path to the directory. Install cannot continue. Log in as administrator or contact your system administrator. Well, right off the bat, you think, that means I'm probably not logged in as account with system or with administrator permissions on this computer. Sadly, not the case in this particular instance. So then you'll get another error message, error 1905, module, then gives you a path to some big long thing there. Contact your support personnel. So you'll usually get these one right after the other. And contrary to what it looked like in the first error message here where it says log on as administrator or contact your system administrator, it's not exactly administrative permissions on the computer that's causing it. It is good old UAC. So if you're not familiar with UAC, this was introduced in, I believe, Vista in order to try to prevent, unwanted software from installing malware. Basically, should have to prompt you before anything's allowed to install on the computer. Problem is sometimes it can block some of the permissions that the Autodesk software requires during the install. So definitely recommend disabling UAC before you try installing Autodesk software. Again, this is a link on our blog site, our Up and Ready site, that covers the same 1303 and 1905 errors and gives us the nice solution here. Windows User Access Control. So how do you disable UAC? Well, if you just bring up the Start menu, type in UAC. Here we are, Change User Account Control Settings. Now, I already have it disabled on here. By default, it's up here on Notify Me when programs try to make changes to my computer. Just drag that all the way down to the bottom, hit OK, and that's got it disabled. And that'll get rid of this 1303-1905 error, as well as a number of other install issues can be caused by UAC. So definitely leads us to our next best practice, disable UAC. Always recommend you have that disabled during the install of Autodesk software. Once the installation is complete, definitely recommend that you go back in and bump it back up to the default, just so you're protected the rest of the time. Don't want malware getting in there. But during the install of the Autodesk software, disable it. You'll prevent a whole bunch of install issues if you do that. All right. I'll show you one more installation issue that we see with service packs in particular in this case. Sometimes, especially if you have a suite installed and you're trying to update, say, AutoCAD, for instance, in a suite, you download the AutoCAD service pack, try to install it, and you get this message. Service pack could not be installed because the expected Autodesk product could not be located on your computer. Make sure that you're using the correct service pack for the product. Well, some suites can be confusing. So the issue in this case is you are indeed installing the wrong service pack. You launch the software from your suite, it says AutoCAD up there and everything, so you're expecting, oh, I'm going to go download the AutoCAD service pack. Well, it might not actually be AutoCAD. Couple of ways you can check just to make sure what version of the software is installed. If you go to the shortcut where you launch the software, so either on the Start menu or the desktop shortcut, right-click on it, select Properties, and look in the target for it. Look if there's anything, go back here, look if there is a /product in that shortcut. So it'll have the path to like C program files, Autodesk, AutoCAD 2015, and then /product after that in the link. In this case, it has a /product followed by an ACADM, for example, which means AutoCAD Mechanical. So the product itself is actually AutoCAD Mechanical running a vanilla AutoCAD profile on it. So looks like AutoCAD when you launch it, isn't actually vanilla AutoCAD. It's AutoCAD Mechanical underneath, therefore requires the AutoCAD Mechanical service pack. And another way you can check is in the software itself, go to Help. So if you click on up here at the top right, there's a sort of question mark, and just to the right of that is a little down arrow, kind of hard to see on the screenshot. I know it's a little small. Go to that and then click on Help, the first item on the list. Now you can see here down at the bottom it just says about Autodesk AutoCAD, and then it cuts off, but it's 2015. So it doesn't tell you right there that you're not in actual vanilla AutoCAD, but if you go to Help, it brings up the AutoCAD Mechanical 2015 Help. Another way you can tell, oh, this is actually AutoCAD Mechanical. So again, suites, they'll often install a vertical, not the base product. So in this case, Product Design Suite, it will install AutoCAD Mechanical, which will include a vanilla profile of AutoCAD. So it'll look like AutoCAD when you launch it, but that's actually AutoCAD living on top of AutoCAD Mechanical. So in order to get the service pack to install, you actually need the AutoCAD Mechanical service pack. Again, doesn't really lead us to a best practice, but just a good thing to be aware of when you're installing service packs, especially service packs for suites. Verify the actual version of the software that you have installed. It can mislead you if you're just looking like at the banner at the top or whatever. It's not necessarily actually the version that you have installed. All right, so let's just summarize the best practices here. Again, I recommend you do all of these every time you install Autodesk software. It's kind of the best way to eliminate as many installation issues as possible. Certainly not going to get them all, but it'll give you your best chance of not running into installation issues. First of all, check the system requirements. Make sure you have the right version of Windows or whatever operating system you're using, Mac OS. You know, some of the just come out with the 10.10 Yosemite update, and some of the software won't install on there. So make sure that the product that you're wanting to install actually is going to work with the software that you have on your computer. Install all the important updates for Windows Update. Obviously, it doesn't apply to Mac users or Linux users, but if you're on Windows, make sure you have all those important updates installed. That should get all the prerequisites set up for their best chance to install the software successfully. Like I said, if you're installing an older version, you still may run into issues because the older version of software is looking for an older version of .NET or C++. But with most of the newer software, very important that you have the latest updates installed. Make sure you're installing with an account that has administrator permissions on the computer. Otherwise, you may get some permissions errors during the install process. Also, very important, disable your antivirus software during the install process. All kinds of fun issues can happen if you have your antivirus enabled during the install. It can block registry keys and files and all kinds of great stuff. So just make sure you have the antivirus software disabled. Good idea to empty your Windows temp folder before you install the Autodesk software. Again, if you have temp files from a previous install didn't complete successfully, or if there's just plain old corruption in the files that are in the temp folder, that can help eliminate a lot of install errors itself. And also, finally, disable UAC. Again, can lead to permissions issues, can act like you're not actually an administrator on the computer, even though you are. So disable it while you're installing the software, re-enable it when you're done installing the software. Also important for the antivirus, re-enable it when you're done installing the software. All right, so that brings us to the end of the presentation. Hopefully you learned something useful that you can actually use in the future. I know we obviously didn't cover all of the various installation issues that can happen, but hopefully with the best practices, you at least got some tools that will help you prevent as many install errors as possible in the future. All right, so I'll turn things over to David for the Q&A session.
Great, thanks. We did have some questions and some points that were pretty interesting. Speaking to one of the slides you had, the system requirements, it's important to note that the release cycle of Autodesk products does not always coincide with the release cycle of operating systems. This is something we actually saw with Windows 7, and it's something we saw with Windows 8 and 8.1. Some organizations like to get up and ready on the latest operating system as soon as it's released, when the truth is, if, for instance, Windows 8 dropped in the fall, our software release dropped in the spring, that pretty much means all of our software was not tested or programmed for that new operating system. So if somebody installs on a system that wasn't actually tested, it's not listed as being supported. There's a reason for that. Yes, theoretically they could have got developer copies of Windows 8 in advance, but if the release happens in the fall for an operating system, Windows 8 was a good example. If the release came out there, Microsoft can do whatever they want and change that operating system up into the day before they release it. So they can't, our programmers can't attempt to compensate for anything that they may change midstream. So this is also something we saw when Mavericks came out. Mavericks was a free operating system for Mac OS. It came out and everybody wanted to jump to it because it's Mac and it was free. And then in doing so, it came out after our release cycle, so we suddenly had problems with people saying, I can't install Maya, I can't install AutoCAD, what's going on? And it's because we didn't have access to that operating system in its final form before clients had access in its final form. So they can't program and dedicate resources to try to compensate for issues. So you're taking a chance if you upgrade your operating system too soon. In most cases, historically it seems like there's usually not a whole lot of blocks, but there definitely could be a problem. It's not uncommon. You just want to make sure you're matching the system requirements, especially if you're using older software. Somebody calls in and says, I'm trying to install AutoCAD 2002. Does it install on Windows 8? No, it doesn't. It was 10 years before it was even a concept. you're welcome to try, of course, but it may not install, it may not work, you just don't know. So they have those requirements for a reason to match up with what the developers were programming for. As far as the wrong service pack goes, that we see that sometimes too. A very common one is someone contacts us and says, I can't install the AutoCAD service pack. And then you get a look at their computer and, oh, you can't install the service pack because you don't have AutoCAD installed. You actually have AutoCAD LT installed, and those are two completely different programs. So it's important to know exactly what you're having. Another way to actually check to see what you have installed, so you can look at the control panel. Just look at your installed programs list. It'll tell you. We had a point here. Also, if you're disabling your user account control, you do need to reboot your Windows machine in order for those instructions to take place. All right. One of our good questions was, what was the effect of not having Microsoft redistributables installed? Okay, if they weren't installed at all, the software wouldn't run. So the troubleshooting here wasn't so much to say we don't want to install the C++ redistributables at all. It was, okay, they're already installed on the machine and there's a clash during the installation process. One of the ways around it is to avoid installing them. And that's what you would do by adjusting the setup INI file if that was the case. Or you could manually uninstall them as well. That's not something everybody has to do, but the C++ redistributables are items that are updated very frequently by Microsoft. And it's not unusual to see between 5 to 20 installs on a given machine. And a lot of them may be duplicates and have duplicate instructions in them. And you can't sometimes tell which set of instructions the installer is clashing with, because the Autodesk installer is running Microsoft installers, which could be clashing against other versions of Microsoft installers. So the C++s need to be installed, just like .NET. It needs to be installed, but sometimes we have to uninstall them or we have to comment out a file to get around them. There was a question about the temp folder. Okay, is it the temp folder, or is it the Windows temp location, or both? Basically, the percent 10% location that you would find if you typed in that value, that will default you to the Windows temp directory that you're currently using on your system. That's the one you want. That's basically where all our files will be extracted, and they'll run the temp files from that location. So that's what we're looking for. I know we're at the end of the hour. I don't want to keep people, but if you have questions, please, you can continue to put them in the question window as we stop this presentation, and also you can update the forums. We'll take a look for those as well. We're going to post these questions, and of course we'll answer whatever else we can, and we'll get that stuff posted and available to you to review. So, great. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.